The scream died in her throat the moment she saw the rifle. But it was not pointed at her, it was pointed past her, into the darkness where the voices of men echoed through the pines. Sienna Keller pressed herself against the rough bark of the oak tree, her dress torn and mudded, her bare feet bleeding from the miles she had run through the New Mexico wilderness, and tried to make herself smaller as the cowboy stepped between her and certain death. "They're hunting me," she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. The cowboy was tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a weathered Stetson, and when he looked down at her with eyes the color of aged whiskey, something shifted in his expression, something hard and protective and utterly resolute. "Not anymore," he said, and the words carried the weight of a promise that would change both their lives forever. It was late September in 1878, and the New Mexico territory was still wild enough that a woman could disappear without a trace, which was exactly what Sienna had been trying to do for 3 days. She had fled from Santa Fe with nothing but the clothes on her back and a pocket watch that belonged to her father, the watch that had gotten him killed and put a target on her back. The Dalton Gang wanted it, claimed her father had stolen it from them during a card game, though Sienna knew the truth was far more complicated. Her father had won it fair and square, but men like Frank Dalton did not care about fairness or truth. They cared about revenge, and the rumored map, etched into the watch's inner casing, a map that supposedly led to a cache of Confederate gold hidden somewhere in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The cowboy's name was Declan Norton, and he had been tracking a stolen horse when he stumbled upon Sienna, hiding in the woods outside the small settlement of Las Vegas, New Mexico. He was 26 years old, a horse wrangler and occasional ranch hand who had learned to survive by his wits and his Winchester rifle. He had no family to speak of, no ties that bound him to any particular place, which made him the kind of man who could make a decision like protecting a stranger without worrying about the consequences. "How many are there?" Declan asked, keeping his voice low as he scanned the trees. "5, Sienna managed to say, her teeth chattering despite the mild evening air. "Maybe 6. I lost count after they split up to search for me. Can you ride?" She nodded, though she was not entirely sure that was true. She had ridden as a child, but that had been years ago, before her mother died and her father moved them to Santa Fe to start over. Declan whistled softly, and a magnificent bay gelding emerged from the shadows, its coat gleaming even in the dim light. He helped Sienna onto the horse with surprising gentleness, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and she felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the steady beat of his heart that seemed impossibly calm given the circumstances. "Hold on," he murmured against her ear, and then they were moving, the horse navigating the forest floor with practiced ease while shouts erupted behind them. They rode through the night, putting miles between themselves and the Dalton Gang, stopping only once to let the horse drink from a creek. Declan gave Sienna his canteen and a piece of jerky from his saddlebag, watching her with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see far more than she wanted to reveal. "You going to tell me what this is really about?" he asked as she drank greedily from the canteen. Sienna hesitated, then pulled the pocket watch from the hidden pocket she had sewn into her dress. It was silver, beautifully engraved with her father's initials, and when she opened it, the photograph of her mother smiled up at her from one side while the other side showed a series of tiny scratches that could have been random marks or could have been something more. "My father won this in a card game 2 weeks ago," she said quietly. 3 days later, he was shot dead in the street. The men who killed him said he was a cheat and a thief. They wanted this watch, said it belonged to them. I ran before they could take it from me, too." Declan took the watch carefully, holding it up to catch the moonlight. His expression was thoughtful as he examined the markings, his fingers tracing the delicate scratches with surprising care. "Confederate gold," he said finally. It was not a question. "That is what they think," Sienna replied. "I do not know if it is real or just a story men tell themselves to justify murder." "Does not matter if it is real," Declan said, handing the watch back to her. "Matters that they believe it is. That makes you a target until we figure out how to make you disappear for good or make them disappear instead." The "we" in that sentence made something warm unfurl in Sienna's chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. They reached the town of Las Vegas just before dawn, but Declan did not take her into the main settlement. Instead, he guided the bay to a small ranch on the outskirts, a modest property with a sturdy barn and a house that had seen better days but still stood proud against the vast New Mexico sky. "This is your place?" Sienna asked as Declan helped her down from the horse. "For now," he said. "I work for the owner, old man named Samuel Pritchard. He is in Denver visiting his daughter, left me to mind things while he is gone. We'll be safe here for a few days while we figure out our next move." Our next move. There it was again, that casual assumption that they were in this together, that he had somehow decided her problems were his problems. Sienna should have protested, should have told him she could not drag him into her mess, but the truth was she was too exhausted and too grateful to argue. She had been alone for so long, first after her mother's death, then managing her father's grief and his reckless attempts to rebuild their life, and finally in the terror-filled days after his murder, that the simple act of someone standing beside her felt like a miracle. Declan settled her in the main house, starting a fire in the stone hearth and putting coffee on to boil. He found a basin and filled it with water, setting it near the fire to warm, then disappeared into one of the back rooms and returned with clean clothes, a shirt and pants that would be too large for her, but were infinitely better than her ruined dress. "There is a screen in the corner," he said, gesturing to a folding partition. "You can clean up and change. I will make us some breakfast." Sienna did as he suggested, scrubbing the dirt and blood from her skin with a cloth, wincing at the cuts and bruises that covered her feet and legs. When she emerged from behind the screen wearing Declan's oversized clothes, her long dark hair still damp and hanging loose down her back, she found him at the stove, frying eggs and bacon with the competence of a man used to taking care of himself. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the rough-hewn table. "You need food and rest." They ate in comfortable silence, and Sienna found herself studying him in the morning light. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with strong features and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of days spent working outdoors. His hands were calloused and capable, the hands of a man who knew hard work, and there was a quiet strength about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, setting down her fork. "You do not know me. This is not your fight." Declan looked up from his plate, his amber eyes meeting hers directly. "My father used to say that a man's worth is not measured by what he does when it is convenient, but by what he does when it costs him something. Maybe I am just trying to prove I am worth something." There was an old pain in those words, a story he was not telling, and Sienna found herself wanting to know everything about this man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. "Besides," Declan added with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish, "I have never liked bullies, and men who hunt down women for a piece of metal definitely qualify as bullies in my book." They spent that first day planning, trying to determine the best course of action. Declan suggested they could head west to California, where Sienna could disappear into one of the growing cities and start fresh. Or they could go north to Colorado, where the mining towns were always looking for respectable women to work as teachers or shopkeepers. Or they could stay and fight, try to convince the law that Sienna was innocent and the Dalton Gang were the real criminals. "The law did not help my father," Sienna said bitterly. "Frank Dalton has the sheriff in Santa Fe in his pocket. I would be dead before I could even tell my story." "Then we run," Declan said simply. "Pick a direction and ride until they cannot find us." But Sienna was tired of running. She had been running her whole life from her mother's death, from poverty, from the whispers and pitying looks that followed her and her father wherever they went. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting men like Frank Dalton dictate the terms of her existence. "What if we could convince them the watch is worthless?" she suggested. "What if we could prove there is no map, no gold, nothing worth killing for?" Declan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "We would need to get an expert to examine it, someone whose word carries weight. And even then, not sure men like Dalton would believe it. They have invested too much in the story." "Then maybe we need to give them what they want," Sienna said slowly, an idea forming. "Not the real watch, a fake, something that looks convincing but leads them nowhere." It was risky, but it was better than spending the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Declan knew a watchmaker in Santa Fe, an old German immigrant named Heinrich Müller, who owed him a favor and could be trusted to keep his mouth shut. If they could get to him, explain the situation, maybe Heinrich could create a duplicate convincing enough to fool the Dalton Gang. They left the next morning, Sienna riding behind Declan again, her arms wrapped around his waist. The journey to Santa Fe would take 2 days, and they traveled cautiously, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the less populated trails. They talked as they rode, sharing stories that slowly revealed the contours of their lives. Declan told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and how he had left home at 16 after his mother died, and his father remarried a woman who made it clear there was no place for him in the new family arrangement. He had been wandering ever since, working where he could, building a life that was small but his own. Sienna told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother's beautiful singing voice and her father's dreams of striking it rich out west. She told him about the cholera epidemic that took her mother when Sienna was 12, and how her father had never really recovered from that loss, chasing one failed opportunity after another until he ended up in Santa Fe, gambling and drinking and pretending he was still the man he had been when his wife was alive. "I loved him," Sienna said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I also resented him." "Is that terrible?" "No," Declan said gently. "It is human. We can love people and still be angry at them for the choices they make." They camped that night in a small canyon, Declan building a fire and laying out bedrolls while Sienna prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The stars overhead were brilliant, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and as they sat by the fire, Sienna felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had formed in the woods when he had first stepped between her and danger. "Can I ask you something?" Sienna said, staring into the flames. "Anything." "What happened to make you believe you need to prove your worth? You saved my life, Declan. That seems pretty worthy to me." He was quiet for a long moment, and Sienna thought maybe she had pushed too far, asked for too much. But then he started speaking, his voice low and rough. "When I was 17, I was working on a ranch in West Texas. There was a girl there, daughter of the ranch owner. Her name was Mary, and she was sweet and kind, and for some fool reason she seemed to like me. We were just kids, really, but I thought maybe we had a future. Then one day a group of Comanche raiders came through. They hit the ranch, took some horses, and Mary, she was out by the barn when it happened. I heard her scream and I ran, but by the time I got there they were already riding off with her. I tried to follow, tried to catch up, but my horse threw a shoe and I lost them in the Badlands. He paused, his jaw tight with remembered pain. They found her 3 days later. She was alive, but she was not the same. Her father blamed me, said I should have protected her, should have died trying if necessary. He ran me off the ranch, and I have not been able to shake the feeling that he was right, that I failed when it mattered most. Sienna reached out and took his hand, her fingers curling around his. You were a kid, Declan. You did what you could. What happened to Mary was not your fault. I know that up here, he said, tapping his temple with his free hand. But knowing and believing are different things. Then let me tell you what I believe, Sienna said firmly. I believe you are a good man who has been carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. I believe you are brave and kind, and I believe that what you did for me, a complete stranger, says everything about who you are. Declan looked at her then, really looked at her, and something hot and intense flared in his eyes. For a heartbeat, Sienna thought he might kiss her, and she realized with a start that she wanted him to. But instead, he squeezed her hand gently and released it, turning back to the fire. You should get some rest, he said. We have a long ride tomorrow. Sienna lay in her bedroll that night, staring up at the stars, and wondered when exactly she had started falling in love with the cowboy who had saved her life. It seemed impossible, too fast, too unlikely, but the heart, she was learning, did not care much about logic or timing. It simply felt what it felt, and what she felt for Declan Norton was growing stronger with every passing hour. They reached Santa Fe late the following afternoon, entering through the outskirts and keeping to the quieter streets. Heinrich Mueller's shop was tucked into a narrow alley near the plaza, a small storefront with a painted sign that read Mueller's Fine Timepieces in elegant script. Declan dismounted first, then helped Sienna down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The shop was cramped and cluttered, every surface covered with watches and clocks in various states of repair. Heinrich himself was a wizened man in his 60s with thick spectacles and nimble fingers that moved with practiced precision over the delicate mechanisms spread before him. Declan Norton, Heinrich said in his thick German accent, looking up from his workbench. I have not seen you in. He stopped abruptly as he noticed Sienna, his eyes widening slightly. And you have brought company. This must be serious. It is, Declan agreed, moving deeper into the shop and closing the door behind them. We need your help, Heinrich, and we need your discretion. They explained the situation, Sienna showing Heinrich the pocket watch while Declan outlined their plan. The old watchmaker listened carefully, turning the watch over in his hands and examining it with a jeweler's loupe. This is fine work, Heinrich murmured. The engraving alone would take days to replicate, and these markings very subtle. If they are indeed a map, it is cunningly disguised. Can you make a copy? Sienna asked. Something good enough to fool someone who has never actually held the original. Heinrich considered this, his expression thoughtful. I can make something convincing, yes, but it will take time, perhaps a week, maybe more, and I will need the original to work from. How long if you just need to make something that looks right on the outside? Declan pressed. The Dalton Gang has never actually had this watch in their hands. They are working from descriptions and rumors. If you can create something that matches the basic appearance and has some kind of markings inside that could be a map, that might be enough. 3 days, Heinrich said after a moment. I can do it in 3 days if I work around the clock, but you will need to stay hidden until it is ready. The Dalton Gang has been asking around town, showing a sketch of your friend here to anyone who will look at it. They are offering a reward for information about her whereabouts." Sienna's stomach dropped. She had known they were being hunted, but hearing it confirmed so matter-of-factly made it real in a way that terrified her. "We have a place to hide," Declan said, his hand finding Sienna's and squeezing reassuringly. "Just get the work done, Heinrich. We will take care of the rest." They left the shop as carefully as they had entered, Declan leading Sienna through a maze of back alleys until they reached a small boarding house on the edge of town. The proprietor was a Mexican woman named Rosa, who greeted Declan like an old friend, and asked no questions when he requested a room at the back of the house, where they would not be easily seen from the street. "You can trust Rosa," Declan assured Sienna as they climbed the narrow stairs to their room. "She has helped me before when I needed to lay low." The room was small but clean, with a double bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto a small courtyard. Sienna stood in the center of the space, suddenly very aware that they would be sharing close quarters for the next few days, and feeling the weight of everything that was unspoken between them. "I can sleep on the floor," Declan said, as if reading her thoughts. "You take the bed." "Don't be ridiculous," Sienna replied. "The bed is big enough for both of us. We are both adults, and after everything we have been through together, I think we can manage to share a bed without impropriety." She said it with more confidence than she felt, but Declan simply nodded, setting his saddlebags down in the corner and removing his gun belt. They had dinner brought up to the room, Rosa's excellent pozole and fresh tortillas, and ate while discussing their plan for the exchange once Heinrich completed the fake watch. "We will need to draw them out," Declan said, "somewhere public enough that they cannot just kill us and take the watch, but private enough that we can control the situation." "What about the old mission outside of town?" Sienna suggested. "It is usually deserted this time of year, but it is close enough to the main road that we could get help if things go wrong." Declan nodded slowly. "That could work. We send word to Frank Dalton that you want to make a deal the watch in exchange for safe passage out of the territory. He shows up with a couple of men, we hand over the fake, and by the time he realizes it is worthless, we are long gone." It was not a perfect plan, but it was the best they had. The question was whether Frank Dalton would agree to a meeting, or whether he would simply try to take what he wanted by force. That night, lying in the darkness with Declan beside her, Sienna found herself unable to sleep. She was hyper-aware of his presence, of the sound of his breathing and the warmth radiating from his body. They had been lying there for over an hour, maintaining a careful distance, when Declan spoke into the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," Sienna whispered. "I have been thinking about what happens after this is done," he said quietly. "Assuming everything goes according to plan and we manage to get the Dalton Gang off your trail, what will you do then? Where will you go?" Sienna had been avoiding that question, not wanting to think about the moment when this strange, intense journey would end, and she would have to figure out how to build a life from the ruins of everything she had lost. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have no family left, no home to return to. I suppose I will do what you do, find work somewhere, start over, build something new." "You could come with me," Declan said, and Sienna's heart stuttered in her chest. "I have been thinking about settling down, maybe buying a small piece of land and starting my own ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough to run some horses and cattle and make a decent living. I would like it if you were there, if you wanted to be." Sienna rolled onto her side, trying to see his face in the darkness. "Declan, are you asking me to?" "I am asking if you would consider building a future with me," he said, turning to face her. Their faces were inches apart now, and she could see the earnestness in his eyes even in the dim light filtering through the window. I know it is fast, and I know we barely know each other, but Sienna, I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and when I think about my future, all I can see is you in it." Sienna felt tears prick at her eyes, emotion overwhelming her. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or fear or the intensity of the situation, but it is more than that. It is you, Declan. It has been you since the moment you stepped between me and danger and promised you would not let them hurt me." He reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Then say yes. Say you will take a chance on a wandering cowboy who has nothing to offer you except his heart and his promise that he will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Sienna breathed, and then his lips were on hers, tender and seeking, a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together. They kissed for a long time, slowly exploring each other, learning the taste and texture of skin and lips and the breathless sounds of pleasure. Declan's hands tangled in her hair while hers traced the strong lines of his shoulders and back. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sienna felt transformed, no longer a frightened woman running from her past, but someone new, someone loved and choosing love in return. "I should probably mention," Declan said, his voice rough with emotion and desire, "that I have absolutely no idea what I am doing when it comes to courting a woman properly. My experience is limited," and Sienna silenced him with another kiss. "We will figure it out together," she said against his lips. "That is what people who love each other do." They spent the next 3 days in that small room, venturing out only when absolutely necessary, and every hour deepened the connection between them. They talked about everything, their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future, the small details of their lives that made them who they were. Declan told her about his love of horses, how working with them had taught him patience and trust. Sienna told him about her mother's music, how she sometimes still heard her voice in the wind. They laughed together, planned together, and slowly built the foundation of something real and lasting. On the 3rd day, Heinrich sent word that the fake watch was ready. They went to collect it after dark, Declan keeping watch while Heinrich presented his handiwork with obvious pride. "It is my finest work," the old watchmaker said, holding up the replica. "Even side by side, you would be hard-pressed to tell the difference without close examination. I have put markings on the inside that could be interpreted as a map, though they lead nowhere. If your Mr. Dalton has any sense, he will have it verified before acting on the information. But if he is as impulsive as you suggest, he may simply take it at face value." Sienna compared the 2 watches, genuinely amazed at the craftsmanship. Heinrich had even replicated the wear patterns on the original, the slight scratches and tarnish that gave it character. She tucked the real watch into her bodice, close to her heart, and handed the fake to Declan. "This is perfect, Heinrich. Thank you." The old man waved away her gratitude. "Just do me a favor and stay alive. Yes, I have few enough friends in this world. I would prefer not to lose more." They sent the message to Frank Dalton through Rosa, who knew people who knew people. That was how information moved in Santa Fe. The message was simple. Sienna Keller was willing to trade the pocket watch for safe passage out of New Mexico territory. They would meet at the old mission San Miguel at noon the following day. Frank could bring 2 men, no more. Sienna would be accompanied by 1 man. The exchange would be straightforward watch for a written guarantee of safe passage, signed by Frank Dalton himself. Whether Dalton would honor such an agreement was debatable, but it got them to the meeting, which was all they needed. The morning of the exchange dawned clear and warm, the New Mexico sky an endless blue. Declan and Sienna rode to the mission early, wanting to scout the location and make sure they were not walking into a trap. The mission was old, its adobe walls weathered by centuries of sun and wind, and the small chapel was empty except for a few rough-hewn pews and a simple wooden cross mounted on the wall. "You do not have to do this," Declan said as they waited in the courtyard, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "We could still run, head west and keep going until they cannot find us, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Sienna shook her head. "No. This ends today, one way or another." Frank Dalton arrived precisely at noon with two hard-faced men flanking him. He was younger than Sienna had expected, perhaps 30, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. He dismounted slowly, making a show of keeping his hands visible as he approached. "Miss Keller," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, not what she had expected from an outlaw. "I am pleased you have decided to be reasonable about this unfortunate situation." "There is nothing reasonable about murdering an innocent man and terrorizing his daughter," Sienna replied, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. Frank's smile widened slightly. "Your father was many things, Miss Keller, but innocent was not one of them. He took something that belonged to me, and I simply reclaimed it with interest." "He won that watch in a fair game," Sienna said, but Frank waved her words away impatiently. "Semantics. The watch contains information that is rightfully mine. Hand it over, and you have my word that you are free to go wherever you please. I have no quarrel with you." Declan stepped forward, the fake watch held in his outstretched hand. "First, you put it in writing, safe passage for Miss Keller, signed and witnessed. Then you get your watch." Frank gestured to one of his men, who produced paper and pencil. He wrote out a brief statement guaranteeing Sienna's safety and signed it with a flourish before handing it to Declan. "Satisfied?" Frank asked with barely concealed impatience. Declan read the document carefully, then nodded to Sienna. She moved forward, taking the watch from Declan and holding it out to Frank. Their eyes met as he took it from her hand, and she saw the greed and triumph in his gaze, the absolute certainty that he had won. "Pleasure doing business with you," Frank said, tucking the watch into his vest pocket without examining it. "A word of advice, Miss Keller, leave New Mexico and do not come back. I may have given you safe passage, but I have a long memory and friends throughout the territory. Make yourself scarce." "That was always the plan," Sienna replied coolly. They watched Frank and his men mount up and ride away, neither of them moving until the three riders had disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Sienna let out the breath she had been holding, her legs suddenly weak with relief. "We did it," she said incredulously. "We actually did it." Declan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You did it. You were so brave, Sienna. I am so damn proud of you." They stayed in Santa Fe just long enough to collect their things and say goodbye to Rosa and Heinrich. Then they rode north toward Colorado, leaving New Mexico territory behind them. Declan had heard about land available near Concord, California, a settlement that was growing quickly as the railroad expanded west. It seemed like as good a place as any to start their new life. The journey west took nearly 2 months, following the old trails through Colorado and Utah, across the high desert of Nevada, and finally into the fertile valleys of California. They traveled mostly alone, though occasionally they joined up with wagon trains for safety, and every night they made camp together, sleeping under the stars and talking about the ranch they would build, the life they would create. They were married in a small ceremony in Sacramento, standing before a circuit judge with 2 strangers pulled in from the street to serve as witnesses. Sienna wore a simple blue dress purchased from a dry goods store, and Declan wore his best shirt and a new hat. and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed her with such tenderness that Sienna felt her heart might burst from happiness. They reached Concord in late December of 1878, finding it exactly as described, a small but growing town with good land available for those willing to work it. Declan used his savings to purchase 40 acres on the outskirts of town, land that came with a small cabin and a barn that needed repairs but was fundamentally sound. They spent their first winter fixing up the property, making the cabin livable and preparing the barn for the horses Declan planned to buy in the spring. It was hard work, but Sienna had never been happier. She woke each morning in Declan's arms, worked beside him throughout the day, and fell asleep each night feeling safe and loved and purposeful in a way she never had before. They were building something real, something that belonged to them, and every nail they hammered and every board they replaced was a testament to their shared commitment to this new life. In February, a letter arrived from Heinrich Müller, forwarded through Rosa in Santa Fe. Frank Dalton had apparently discovered the watch was a fake and had gone on a rampage, tearing through Santa Fe looking for Sienna and Declan. But the trail had gone cold, too much time had passed, and they had covered their tracks too well. Eventually, Frank had given up and moved on to other schemes, other obsessions. They were truly free. Should we be worried he might still come looking for us? Sienna asked as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the golden hills. Declan shook his head. California is a big place, and Concord is not exactly on the map. Besides, Heinrich said Dalton got arrested in Colorado on unrelated charges. Even if he eventually gets out, we will be long established here, part of the community. No one is going to let some out-of-territory outlaw come in and cause trouble. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Declan purchased 6 horses from a breeder in San Francisco, beautiful animals that he trained with patience and skill, eventually selling them to local ranchers for a good profit. Sienna started a vegetable garden and learned to can and preserve food for the winter. They made friends in town, the Johnsons who ran the general store, the Reverend Matthews and his wife, the Martinez family who owned the adjacent property and helped Declan build new corrals for the growing herd. In June, Sienna realized she was pregnant. She told Declan one evening after supper, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach and watching the wonder and joy spread across his face. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Sienna confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are going to be a father, Declan Norton." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy, and then he kissed her with such fierce joy that she felt it down to her toes. Their son was born in February of 1880, arriving during a winter storm that kept the doctor trapped in town and forced Declan to deliver the baby with only the assistance of their neighbor, Maria Martinez. It was terrifying and painful and ultimately triumphant, and when Declan placed their squalling, red-faced son in Sienna's arms, she thought her heart might actually explode with the magnitude of her love. They named him Daniel, after Declan's father, and from the moment he drew his first breath, that little boy became the center of their world. Declan was a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching Daniel about horses as soon as the boy could walk. Sienna watched them together, her heart full, and marveled at how much her life had changed in such a short time. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Declan's reputation as a skilled horse trainer spread throughout the region, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco to purchase his animals. They added cattle to their operation, and Sienna kept chickens and sold eggs in town. They hired help during busy seasons, local boys looking for work, and occasionally drifters passing through who were willing to trade labor for meals and a place to sleep in the barn. In 1882, Sienna gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Catherine. She had Sienna's dark hair and Declan's amber eyes, and from the start, she was a force of nature, stubborn and fearless and utterly captivating. Daniel adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector and constant companion, and watching the two of them together filled Sienna with a contentment so profound. It sometimes brought tears to her eyes. They had built a good life, a real life, in Concord. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house with multiple bedrooms, and a large kitchen where Sienna taught Sarah to bake and Daniel to clean fish he caught in the creek. The barn was always full of horses in various stages of training, and the corrals held cattle bearing their brand, a simple N within a circle that Declan had designed himself. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Declan took Sienna into town for dinner at the new restaurant that had opened near the railroad station. It was a rare evening out, Maria Martinez having agreed to watch the children, and they dressed in their finest clothes and rode in the wagon like they were courting again. Over dinner, Declan reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you remember that night in the woods when you said they were hunting you? How could I forget?" Sienna replied. "That was the night my life changed forever." "Mine too," Declan said softly. "I have never told you this, but that night I had been thinking about moving on, leaving New Mexico and trying somewhere new. I was lonely and restless, and I could not see a future that meant anything. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. You gave me purpose, Sienna. You gave me a reason to be better than I was." Sienna felt tears prick at her eyes. "You saved my life, Declan. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety and love and a family, things I thought I would never have again after my father died. Every morning I wake up beside you. I thank God for sending me to those woods that night." They held hands across the table, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. The restaurant bustled around them, but in that moment, they were the only two people in the world. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children's growth. Daniel proved to be a natural horseman like his father, and by the time he was 10, he was helping train the younger horses and ride out to check on the cattle. Sarah was more interested in books and numbers, and she kept the ranch accounts with a meticulousness that amazed both her parents. In 1887, when Daniel was 7 and Sarah was 5, Sienna discovered she was pregnant again. This third pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She was older now, nearly 30, and the work of running the ranch while caring for two active children had taken its toll. But when their second son, David, was born that winter, healthy and strong with Sienna's dark eyes and a head full of black hair, all the discomfort was forgotten in the overwhelming joy of holding this new life. Declan was 35 now, his temples touched with gray, but he was still strong and vital, still the man who had stepped between her and danger and promised to keep her safe. He was true to that promise every day in the way he worked tirelessly to provide for their family, in the way he held her at night, and told her she was beautiful even when she felt old and tired, in the way he loved their children with a fierceness that sometimes took her breath away. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They purchased an additional 20 acres from the Martinez family when the older couple decided to move to San Francisco to be near their grandchildren. They built a larger barn and a bunkhouse for the 2 permanent ranch hands they now employed. The herd had grown to over 100 head of cattle, and Declan was training horses year-round, his reputation such that he could charge premium prices. Sienna had become a pillar of the Concord community, organizing fundraisers for the new school and serving on the church committee. She taught Sunday school and hosted quilting bees, and people sought her advice on everything from raising children to canning preserves. She was happy and fulfilled, her earlier life of fear and poverty feeling like something that had happened to a different person. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, watching the sun set over the hills and talking about everything and nothing. These were Sienna's favorite moments, the quiet intimacy of being with someone who knew her completely and loved her anyway, the comfortable silence that came from years of shared experience. "You ever think about the watch?" Declan asked one evening. They had not discussed the pocket watch in years, and Sienna was surprised by the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I still have it, you know, the real one. I keep it in my jewelry box, and sometimes I take it out and look at my mother's picture." "Do you ever wonder if the map was real?" Declan asked. "If there really was Confederate gold hidden somewhere in those mountains?" Sienna shrugged. "I suppose we will never know, but honestly, even if it was real, I do not care. That watch cost my father his life and nearly cost me mine. Whatever gold might be buried out there is not worth the price already paid. Besides," she added, reaching over to take his hand, "I found something far more valuable than gold. I found you." Declan raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I am the one who got lucky, Sienna Norton. You turned a wandering cowboy into a man with a home and a purpose. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, and Sienna thought about the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment. She had fled through the woods in terror, certain she would die alone and afraid. Instead, she had found the man who would become her partner, her love, her home. She had built a family and a life beyond anything she could have imagined in those desperate days running from the Dalton Gang. The years continued their steady march forward. Daniel grew into a fine young man, serious and responsible, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch. Sarah, brilliant and determined, went east to college in 1897, one of the first women from Concord to do so, eventually returning with a degree in mathematics, and a fiancé, a nice young lawyer named Thomas who treated her like she hung the moon. David, the youngest, proved to be a gifted artist, filling sketch books with drawings of horses and landscapes and people, and talking about moving to San Francisco to study at an art academy. Declan and Sienna watched their children grow and flourish, their own love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated 20 years of marriage in 1898, surrounded by family and friends at a party that spilled out of the house and into the yard, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half of Concord. 20 years, Sienna marveled as they danced together under the stars, much as they had at their wedding celebration all those years ago. "It feels like yesterday and forever, all at once." "Best 20 years of my life," Declan replied, pulling her closer. "Here is to 20 more." They would not get quite 20 more years together. Declan passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1916, his heart simply giving out after a lifetime of hard work and full living. He was 64 years old, and he died peacefully, Sienna holding his hand as the sun rose over the ranch they had built together. Sienna grieved him deeply, as one grieves the loss of part of themselves, but she did not fall apart. She had learned long ago that she was stronger than she knew, and she carried on, managing the ranch with Daniel's help and doting on the 7 grandchildren who filled her days with noise and joy. She lived another 12 years after Declan's death, passing away quietly in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 70. She was buried beside Declan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that read, Sienna Norton, beloved wife and mother, 1858–1928. Next to hers, Declan's read Declan Norton, beloved husband and father, 1852–1916. Their children, all three of whom had stayed in California and built their own successful lives, inherited the ranch and decided to keep it in the family, passing it down through the generations. The Norton Ranch became something of a landmark in Concord, a piece of living history that reminded people of the old days when the West was still being settled, and people like Declan and Sienna were carving out lives from the wilderness. Years later, one of Sienna's great-granddaughters, a history professor researching family genealogy, discovered the whole story of how Sienna and Declan met the flight through the woods, the Dalton Gang, the clever scheme with the fake watch. She found Heinrich Müller's letters in an old trunk in the attic, along with the original pocket watch that Sienna had kept all those years. The great-granddaughter had the watch professionally examined by historians, and they confirmed what Sienna had long suspected: the markings inside were indeed a map of sorts, though not to Confederate gold. They were actually surveyors' marks indicating the location of water sources and safe camping spots along an old trading route through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Valuable information in the 1860s and 70s, certainly, but hardly worth killing for. Frank Dalton had been chasing a myth, letting greed and obsession destroy lives over something that was never there. But that discovery came long after Sienna and Declan were gone, long after the story of their love had passed into family legend. What remained was the truth of what they had built together: a ranch that still stood, children and grandchildren who carried their legacy, and a love story that began with fear and desperation and ended with a lifetime of devotion. In the woods outside Las Vegas, New Mexico, on an autumn night in 1878, a terrified young woman had whispered, "They're hunting me," to a stranger who would become her everything. And that stranger, that good and decent man who was still trying to prove his worth to a world that had never appreciated him, had responded with words that changed both their lives forever. Not anymore. It was a promise he kept every day for the rest of their lives, and in keeping it, he gave them both something neither had dared to hope for: a home, a family, and a love that endured beyond death itself. The ranch stood as testament to that promise, to the courage it took to fight for a chance at happiness, and to the transformative power of love found in the most unlikely of places. Their story was one of thousands that played out across the American West in those wild, turbulent years: stories of people running from their pasts and fighting for their futures, stories of love blooming in harsh landscapes and enduring against impossible odds. But for the Norton family, for the descendants who still worked the land Declan and Sienna had claimed as their own, it was not just another story. It was the foundation of everything they were, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is step between someone else and danger, and promise to stand there for as long as they are needed. Declan and Sienna Norton lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy that lasted long after their deaths. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for: to matter, to be remembered, to have made the world a better place simply by being in it. They had done all that and more, two souls who found each other in darkness and spent their lives creating light.